Twisting children's media to make it look pretty messed up when you think about it is broadly and charitably speaking an unrewarding form of online content, whether it's a listicle of 10 princesses who are actually the bad guy, or a poorly researched video about Beauty and the Beast and Stockholm Syndrome. Disney properties in particular never seem to be spared this treatment. The Toy Story franchise is no exception, and I have to admit that I came into this video with the explicit goal of shutting down the oft-repeated LOL isn't Toy Story so existential line of thinking, which I felt falls into this category. What I found as I watched through these films for the first time as an adult, however, is that, yeah, they are actually quite existential. Oops. However, I adamantly maintain that there is more to that existentialism than just, whoa, so dark, man. So today let's look at these Toy Stories and in the process discuss how exactly a series of kids' movies managed to take on complicated, often adult notions of identity without losing its own.
You are a toy! You are a child's plaything!
Believe it or not, Toy Story, a movie aimed primarily at 5-year-olds that doesn't even reach an 80-minute runtime, is rather simple. Be sure to smash that subscribe button for more mind-blowing insights. Toy Story is a story about a toy. Be sure to smash that subscribe button for more named Woody as he copes with the arrival of a cool new Buzz Lightyear toy. Woody becomes jealous when their owner Andy begins playing with Buzz more than him, and after kinda accidentally knocking him out of the house, Woody is forced into an odd couple adventure to bring him back, during which he and Buzz, of course, overcome their differences and become friends. Cold take alert, Toy Story is really good, with Pixar having to fight against their equal parts cutting edge and primitive technology for every single frame. They couldn't afford fluff, so everything is tight, essential, and fast paced, which are crucial qualities to have if you want to retain the fickle attention of children. Or me. Before we move on from the CGI actually, beyond just how well they capture the scale of the world through a toy's eyes, what struck me most about Toy Story's filmmaking is that there's a lot of it. There are plenty of interesting camera moves and stylized angles, there are maybe too many cinematic point of view shots. It's clear that they really wanted this first 3D animated movie to feel like a film, and I do appreciate the effort that went into accomplishing this. Going back to the storytelling simplicity, I imagine that need for immediate audience understanding is the main reason why Woody and Buzz are such blatant opposites in every way. Woody is a leader and a bit of a tryhard, while Buzz is a soldier who naturally gets along with everybody. Woody cares about nothing more than his duties as a toy, while Buzz doesn't even believe that he is one. As much as I do enjoy the core relationship between Woody and Buzz, the real star of the show for me is the world of Toy Story itself. Pixar has become well known for its concept movies. We've got What If a Rat Could Cook, What If Feelings Had Feelings, and What If Monsters Were People, a question that Toy Story itself also explores through its choice of director and lead writer. This reputation isn't unfounded, as here in their very first feature, Pixar proves that they can absolutely nail the execution of a fascinating concept. I didn't actually time this out, but I'd be willing to bet that nowhere in this film do 5 minutes pass without some incredibly creative toy world idea making an appearance. The filmmakers clearly packed in as many scenarios and gags unique to this world as they possibly could, especially in the first act, and it's always a good sign when a franchise immediately goes all in on what makes it unique. The rest of Andy's toys benefit from this strength too, as while they do have very distinct and iconically voiced personalities, the fact that there's the dinosaur character and the piggy bank character helps them stand out from one another even more. They're all quite memorable considering how little screen time they actually get. After all, there's not a whole lot of screen time to begin with. This is also definitely helped by the fact that a lot of the best jokes are given to the supporting cast, and I would be remiss not to mention how consistently funny this movie is.
Hey, Ham, look, I'm Picasso.
Would it surprise you to learn that I like that joke? But what about our topic of I can't believe they put that in a kids movie, existentialism? Doesn't Buzz think that he's a real space ranger only to then realize that he is merely an object to be used and discarded in a world of unobserving, uncaring mortal gods? Technically, but you do realize that that's the surface level reading, right? I can't deny that Buzz is literally grappling with what he is in a metaphysical sense, but those are just the unexamined events. Emotionally, the focus is on a much more mundane, but therefore relatable sense of identity. Buzz saw himself one way and now has to adjust to another. While less, no pun intended, BuzzFeed worthy, this less out there approach is the more fruitful one as it actually ties into the rest of the movie. This is how Woody and Buzz are thematically linked. Woody's jealousy is fueled by his identity being threatened. He is nothing if not Andy's favorite. And it's only when Woody finally acknowledges this insecurity and concedes how cool Buzz is that the ex-Space Ranger learns to value himself in this new way, thus resolving both protagonists' internal and external struggles. It's also worth noting that the third act takes place in the house of troubled neighbor Sid, who has crafted a slew of toy hybrids out of various parts, mutants of deliberately butchered identity. Yet these seemingly monstrous toys end up being allies, not enemies. Even one of the comedic side characters, Rex, is defined by his struggle to be fearsome, despite his less than intimidating demeanor. This character is voiced by Wallace Shawn, by the way, and the thought of me letting his appearance pass by without making a Princess Bride joke, why, that's just... My point is that the goal of Toy Story is not to make little Billy, age 4.5, reflect upon the insignificance of his soul amidst an infinite cosmos. And while even the milder notions of self that I'm championing will probably fly well over a child's head, I do still think that the general themes can hold a lot of value for them. I can totally see Woody's struggle with jealousy being a very useful emotional reference point for a kid who's having a hard time adjusting to a new sibling entering their life, or even just a kid whose best friend suddenly starts playing with someone else at recess. Bradley, why? Anyway, to wrap up my thoughts on the movie, Toy Story is a very fun and imaginative adventure. Pixar has now very much outdone it in both concept and especially emotional punch, but given the studio's pedigree, it is commendable how decently high in the ranking Toy Story has managed to stay these 20-odd years. I will continue to bring up the subject, but I think I can also partially wrap up my beef with the Toy Story is darkly existential discourse. Woody and Buzz both feeling unsure of their purpose is clearly the point of the film, but saying that is not going to pull in the views. I should know. So in order to get to the at least mildly eccentric angle of actually it's about a little action figure grappling with the trivial nature of his very being, actually, one has to ignore or at least minimize the movie's clear core intentions, and of course this applies to any movie approached this way. So I don't know, y'all can have your fun, but personally I think it's a bad faith, self-satisfied, and above all shallow way to interact with art, and it seems to appeal mostly to those who would rather outsmart stories than genuinely engage with them. But hey, that's just a theory.
How long will it last, Woody? Andy's growing up, and there's nothing you can do about it.
It's strange to me that Pixar initially didn't plan on turning Toy Story into a franchise. While the team held nothing back on Toy Story 1, this premise's potential was obviously never going to be able to be fully realized in just one short movie. It's also strange to think that Toy Story 2 was almost a direct-to-video release, that it was almost completely deleted, and then it was almost completely remade, because what came out of all that turmoil is what many consider to be the best film in the series. Toy Story 2 revolves around Woody being stolen in order to be resold as a collector's item, prompting Buzz and the rest of his friends to undertake a cross-town rescue mission to save him. Meanwhile, after meeting Jesse, Bullseye, and the Prospector, cowboy counterparts also set to be sold, Woody learns that he's part of something much bigger than he thought and begins to question whether he should go back to Andy at all. Like most sequels, Toy Story 2 expands on its world. For one, there's just more outside stuff, but much more of note than that is that with the house setting being so impressively played out by the first movie, all the sequels find other toy-adjacent locations to take place in. In a shining example of Pixar's unmatched creative ingenuity, Toy Story 2 partially takes place in a toy store. How do they come up with this stuff? I think they could have pulled an entire movie out of this setting if they had fleshed it out more, but as is, it does give us some fun characters like tour guide Barbie and Buzz's arch-nemesis Emperor Zurg. Buzz also comes across and is temporarily replaced by a newer Buzz, which allows his trademark delusions to make an amusing return without reverting the character himself. Oh, and if Toy Story was actually existential horror, it would have dwelt on this scene where Buzz is faced with hundreds of himself. Now that messes with my head, man.
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
Sorry about the artless Star Wars reference, but I'm just trying to fit in.
I am your father.
Most of Toy Story 2's expanding is less literal, as the film spends a good chunk of time delving into the, I guess, mythology of Buzz and Woody. The opening sequence, which turns out to be from a Buzz Lightyear video game, lets us see Buzz as he saw himself in the first film. It's a fun look into this fiction within a fiction, as well as I imagine one of the main inspirations behind Lightyear the movie. Kinda wish that movie had taken more inspiration from it, but Woody is the one who gets the most expanding on thanks to Woody's Roundup, an old TV show he turns out to be merchandise from. This is a charming way to reference the real-world inspiration behind the character, and it provides the film with its central dilemma. In an inverse of Buzz's arc from the last movie, Woody discovers that rather than being just a toy, he's kind of a big deal, and once his friends do reach him, he has to choose between these two identities. The first reading of this that jumps out to me is that of a classic love versus fame predicament. The museum Woody would be sent to and the adoration of thousands he would receive there sounds glamorous, but as Buzz argues, it'd ultimately be superficial. I don't think it's a coincidence that 2 is the only film in the series that even acknowledges Woody's showbiz origins. It has some thematic similarities with your typical cautionary tale of Hollywood showbiz, minus the systemic abuses of power. Mostly.
You know, I'm sure I could get you a part in Toy Story 3. I'm sorry, are we back?
There's more going on here than that, though, as interestingly, Toy Story 2, not Toy Story 1, is where the trilogy's big questions first emerge. Thanks to the eventually villainous prospector, Woody is, for the first time, confronted with the fact that Andy will eventually grow up and grow out of him, that his life as he knows it is finite. In fact, the inciting incident of the film is Woody's arm being ripped, a clear symbol of frailty. In contrast, the museum offers something everlasting. Once again, the overblown take that Toy Story 2 is about mortality versus immortality isn't entirely off the mark, but also yes it is. To get to the actual heart of the film, we need to look to newcomer Jessie. Jessie's past is Woody's future. She had an owner that made her happy, like Andy, until inevitably she was cast aside. Now, I vividly remember watching this tear-jerking backstory when I was little and feeling so sorry for Jessie and all the poor toys who were treated this way, but again, that's the surface level. That was my takeaway back when I thought that cereal was the pinnacle of cuisine. Now that I'm older, wiser, and know that cereal is the pinnacle of cuisine, we can do better. Going into my rewatch, I expected to be far less affected by the When She Loved Me sequence than when I was a kid, but oh what a Pixar underestimating fool I was. This scene is no longer just a sad little story about a toy that was abandoned. It is a metaphor for how relationships, friendships, any source of joy in life can/probably will eventually wither and die, and it is actually kind of devastating. If you think that now I'm the one reading too much into this kid's movie, go listen to When She Loved Me on its own. That is not a song about a doll. Okay, maybe it is in the but you know what I mean. This is the bigger reason I get annoyed when people fixate so much on Toy Story's admittedly troubling in-world implications. They are totally missing the forest for the trees. These movies are not actually about toys. They're about you. Or, to put that another way,
You are a toy!
I do have 2 notes on the execution of Woody's choice. The first is negative. I don't think Woody's initial decision to leave Andy and his friends for the museum fits his character, or at least I think he comes around a little too quickly. The second is positive. I really like how Woody changes his mind after seeing You've Got a Friend in Me being performed on his show. That's a really clever use of the previously non-diegetic song.
I need you all to understand that I will never pass up the opportunity to use the term diegesis. It is literally the only thing I retained from film school.
Toy Story 2 offers a simple solution to its complicated quandary. Through both Woody deciding to go back and Jessie deciding to join him, the film asserts that the heartbreak is worth it. The old "'tis better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all." The very end of the film has Woody explicitly say that it'll be fun while it lasts, and I'm satisfied with this. While being far from Pixar's most revelatory insight, that distinction goes to Inside Out, I don't think there is a better answer. One kinda does have to just make peace with impermanence. And while again, the full weight of this will not be understood by a child, I don't think it's a bad idea to, through a fantastical lens, gently introduce these hard truths to children. Due to Toy Story 1 being as close to comprehensive as it realistically could be, Toy Story 2 can't help but feel a little less creative in comparison, but it is certainly just as entertaining and boasts a far more moving emotional core, so I definitely argue that it's a superior sequel. However, I am very glad that this video isn't done. Okay, that's a lie. I am so tired, but what I mean is that Toy Story 2 benefits greatly from not being the end of the franchise. Because come on, it's easy to say that you're okay with some distant thing in the abstract. One could argue that this series does nothing but deflect its own central dramatic question. Well, one could have argued that, I should say, until 2010.
And as the years go by, a friendship will never die.
Plenty of movies feature lingering eventualities as part of their endings, but few movies are explicitly about those eventualities in the way that Toy Story 2 is, and fewer still are later given sequels that show those inevitabilities arrive. Toy Story 3 is exactly what Toy Story 2 warned was coming, which is simultaneously a no-brainer, and considering that these are delightful family films, also a little shocking. In Toy Story 3, Andy has grown up, and the toys have been all but forgotten. Through a few misunderstandings, the gang ends up at a utopian daycare, which, after turning out to be more dystopian, they must escape from in order to return home to whatever fate awaits them when Andy leaves for college. Like I said before, all the Toy Story sequels find new toy-related locales for themselves, and this daycare is unique in a double-edged sword kind of way. Rather than being basically just a place to bump into some disconnected characters like 2's Toy Store, Sunnyside has a whole toy society going on within its walls, complete with violently enforced power structures. This is what led to support the majority of the film's runtime, but it also stands out as the only time the series features a very human system that's just been shrunk down. I appreciate that it's well woven into the plot, but it's noticeably less organic than especially the loose arrangement of Andy's room, where Woody may be the leader, but there's not like a government. As a side note, Sunnyside and our hero's escape from it also makes Toy Story 3 the only film in the series that has an identifiable subgenre beyond just family adventure comedy. And yes, I do find it super weird that I happen to choose 2 franchises in a row that heavily feature a prison break plotline in their third installments. Sometimes the universe just aligns. Toy Story 3's villain is the Dawn of Sunnyside, Lotso, who became hardened and cruel after being lost and replaced by his former owner. This makes him somewhat similar to Toy Story 2's Prospector, both are twist villains motivated by resentment and neglect, but where the Prospector seeks the attention and glory he's thus far been denied, which links him to Woody's dilemma from that film, Lotso represents a nihilistic response to Woody's Toy Story 3 dilemma of being left behind by Andy.
We're all just trash, waiting to be thrown away.
You know how earlier I said that the minor characters being different things helps distinguish them from one another and therefore stand out? Well, that fact does some ridiculously heavy lifting in Toy Story 3. Toy Story 2 threw a healthy handful of newbies into the mix, but our Pixar parents must have been feeling really guilty about something at the turn of the decade because they are absolutely burying us with new toys here. It's not like I was ever lost because of this overcrowded cast. My issue is more that the newcomers just don't get a chance to shine. And while I think it'd be overly cynical to claim that all of these characters were added simply to sell merchandise, I will point out that the only 2 Pixar films to become franchises are the ones whose characters are already toys. Before we wrap up this character section, I do want to draw attention to a pattern that I've noticed with Buzz. Buzz is of course in Space Ranger mode for most of Toy Story 1, then in Toy Story 2 there's that second still in Space Ranger mode Lightyear toy that takes his place for a while. Now here in 3, the main Buzz is physically reverted back to Space Ranger mode, then after that he's accidentally reset again, this time into Spanish mode. Individually, these things are fine, though I do think a French Buzz would have been funnier, but taken all together, I think it shows that without his initial quirky delusions, Buzz isn't a particularly interesting character, so the writers are forced to constantly make him not just Buzz. This isn't a big deal, nor is it even uncommon. Sometimes a character is designed entirely for an original film, and then despite being done with that defining arc, they just stick around for the sequels. It happens. Okay, that's enough on the peripheral characters. We need to get to Woody and the core of the film. Toy Story 3 is about finality. Not making peace with the idea of finality, actual finality. The toys don't have an uncertain future, they have an uncertain now. Andy is leaving now, and their lives as they know it are over now. Late in the film, our heroes literally stare literal death in the face and accept it, and I know that everyone loves to make a big old deal out of this incinerator scene, but Jesus Christ, Pixar, chill! Okay, don't actually chill, this scene is incredible, and chilling is how we got your lackluster sequels. While Lotso's backstory is the only direct link to this theme present for most of the movie, otherwise it's just another fun adventure with fun characters, the shadow of a terminus certainly lingers throughout. It clings to Woody most of all, who, unlike Buzz, is given yet another internal struggle handcrafted to challenge him specifically as a character. He is, after all, about to lose what has been his primary motivation for the entire trilogy, and that's quite a thing to confront your protagonist with. Toy Story 3's response to the always horrifying fact that nothing lasts forever is, on paper, a bit of a cop-out, but is, in practice, an emotional bullseye. At the daycare, Woody is found, then briefly claimed by a girl named Bonnie, and come the close of the film, he manages to get all of the toys brought to her, leading to a very touching scene in which Andy says farewell to them, including Woody himself. With this ending, Toy Story 3 pivots slightly from being a film about finality to being a film about saying goodbye, and this is where it notoriously left not a dry eye in the theater, mine included. It is also the perfect response to the specter of Toy Story 2. Yes, things end. Their time with Andy is done, but now there's Bonnie. One chapter closes, but another begins. Life goes on, and a new purpose can always be found. It's a really comforting yet still bittersweet sentiment. In each of these sections, I've addressed how the more mature themes I'm discussing may still apply to the film's primarily very young audience, but to do so with 3 would be to miss the point. Yes, kids can and do enjoy Toy Story 3, but it wasn't made for them. I'm surprised that it took me until now to realize that Toy Story 3 is a legacy sequel. It was made 15 years after the original, right as the very first wave of Toy Story fans were leaving their childhoods behind and facing the uncertainty of adulthood themselves. That's who these themes are going to resonate with the most, especially when paired with a lot of nostalgia. It was also, and I think this is an underappreciated strength of the film, made for the parents who watched these movies, probably over and over and over again, with those now grown children. There's a whole scene dedicated to showing Andy's mom being overwhelmed by his suddenly empty room. It's pretty explicit. And of course, a story about moving on to the next phase of your life is going to speak to recent or soon-to-be empty nesters just as potently as to their wayward offspring. Directly related to both of those angles, isn't it fascinating how Woody's relationship with Andy totally switches in between 1 and 3? If you recall, all of my interpretations of Woody's jealousy framed him as a child, but in Toy Story 3, Woody proudly watches Andy move on with his life as if he's now the metaphorical parent. This is obviously a little messy, but in the end both modes work, and the more I think about it, the more impressed I am with how emotionally versatile this franchise's premise and themes are, and how well the various writers took advantage of that. And finally, have you noticed that I haven't brought up those pesky misinterpreters of existentialism even once this entire section? That's because I've never seen anyone pull that card with this movie. Toy Story 3 is such an effective and focused finale that nobody dare distort that brilliance. This, along with the fact that I kept tearing up writing this section, confirms to me that this is my favorite installment of the franchise, and is among Pixar's best. And God, I wish I could also say that it ended this series on a high note, and that we have reached the end of the episode. Not because Toy Story 4 is bad, mind you, again because I am very, very tired. God, this video turned out to be a lot.
Does this mean Woody's a lost toy? He's not lost. Not anymore.
Opinion on Toy Story 4 is pretty split. One camp claims that Pixar shouldn't have made it, that it's an unnecessary, even detrimental epilogue to a perfect finale, where the other camp claims that Pixar pulled off the impossible and delivered a wonderful, entirely worthy epilogue to a perfect finale. The main takeaway there is that everyone rightfully loves Toy Story 3. As to which camp I fall into, well, I wouldn't say I actively dislike Toy Story 4, but the first time I saw it I was on an airplane, and yeah, that seems about right. Toy Story 4 follows the gang on a road trip with Bonnie and her family, during which Woody has to monitor and mentor Forky, Bonnie's craft project turned new favorite toy. This trip also reunites Woody with his old flame Bo Peep, and after seeing what her life is like as a lost toy, he once again questions if he should leave the life he knows behind. The one aspect of Toy Story 4 that undoubtedly deserved better than my tiny little airplane seat screen is the visuals. I haven't been bringing it up because it's super obvious if you've even been glancing at the clips, but each subsequent film does indeed feature noticeably improved animation, with each jump being more drastic than the last. 4 is by far the most visually impressive installment. The incredible lighting in particular makes it a real treat to look at, and if you want a hilariously effective illustration of just how far CGI has come since 1995, just compare Toy Story 4's cat to Toy Story 1's... I want to say raccoon? While we're wrapping up the more miscellaneous subjects, let's talk locations. Toy Story 4 is built around an antique store and a carnival, and while these are utilized well and don't have the overt humanness of Sunnyside, it does seem like we've hit the B tier of toy place ideas, and I'd rather not go any further down the list. The trilogy's exciting climaxes taking place in a street, an airport, and a dump prove that watching the toys navigate a human world is fun in of itself, so I say should Toy Story 5 ever be in the cards, that the writers needn't worry about making all the locations toy-specific, and should just let the story go wherever. These new locations, of course, bring about new characters, but due to Toy Story 3's gluttonous additions to the cast, the series' typical method of making room for them by having all the returning supporting characters act as a singular unit falls apart. While the being different things benefit helps a little, Bonnie simply has too many toys for any of them to really get their dues, and I find Jessie's near absence from this finale particularly glaring. While this is partially 3's fault for introducing so many new toys, it was also entirely within 4's power to jettison some of them, so it is far from off the hook. But what do we get in return for this shortcoming? Well, Keanu Reeves voices the narratively underserved but still amusing Duke Kaboom, Keegan-Michael Key and now renowned filmmaker Jordan Peele play Ducky and Bunny, two stuffed animals that are tethered together. I am so disappointed that I couldn't think of a Get Out joke for right there. I actually kind of hate us. And then there's the film's antagonist, Gabby Gabby, who I have mixed feelings on. Her motivation of wanting to be claimed by a child is a strong one. It makes her a good foil of Woody, and in hindsight I'm surprised it took them 4 films to do it, but we've now had 3 twist villains in a row. It's not like they draw out Gabby's reveal, but she's shown to be sympathetic shortly after and gets a happy ending without changing in any meaningful way, so it's not like they really commit to her as a villain either. Gabby did make me realize something though, and that's that I prefer Toy Story when the antagonists are humans like Sid or Al, rather than other toys like Lotso or Gabby. The disconnect and imbalance between 2 different kinds of beings leads to more unique conflict in my opinion, so I would have preferred if the series hadn't pivoted to man vs. man stories and stayed man vs. nature stories. Though in this case, the nature I'm referring to is a man. Before we get to the final newcomer and the sentient can of worms that he opens, it is definitely worth addressing Toy Story 4's surprisingly poor handling of Buzz. When everyone freaks out about Woody being gone, the film acts like Buzz didn't effortlessly assume a leadership role in both Toy Story 2 and 3, and gives him this weird running joke where he has to listen to his inner voice to figure out what to do.
The slingshot maneuver is all we've got. Full speed ahead.
Not only is this an overly convenient bit that is only funny the first of too many times, but it further supports my argument that there's not a lot to the character of Buzz, as this, in its own way, once again reverts him back to a comedically clueless simpleton, just like he was in Toy Story 1.
You know, my conscience.
Speaking of Toy Story 1 Buzz, and that segue will make sense eventually, have a little faith, I need to vent about Forky. To be blunt, I have no use for Forky. His entire shtick of being a sentient spork is the kind of late franchise meta-ness that signals to me that we need to wrap things up, and I can't help but see him as purposely designed to play to my beloved when you think about it crowd.
Woody, I have a question. Well, actually not just one, I have all of them.
Like what? A plastic utensil can come to life? Does anything viewed as a toy come alive? Do children imbue them with souls? Aren't the ramifications of this fascinating? No! No, they are not! On top of being distracting and off-putting, even if played for laughs, overtly drawing attention to the long-standing creative conceits of your world is, I'm sorry, always a hack move. Now, I don't hate Forky as a character, and of course I find Tony Hale's voice performance charming, I'm not a monster. But given that his arc is going from refusing to be a toy to embracing that role after a heart-to-heart with Woody, the most I get out of him is a rushed and much less engaging semi-retread of Buzz's story in Toy Story 1. See, I told you that segue would come back around. Now never doubt my transition skills again. Next I am going to talk about something else. Sequels, especially epilogue-esque sequels, should ideally never undo their predecessors, and Toy Story 4's first major misstep is doing exactly that. Toy Story 3 shows Bonnie being a big fan of Woody. In fact, this fondness is a very important part of the ending's life goes on message, but come the beginning of 4, Bonnie has suddenly lost interest.
You think you can take care of him for me?
Worse than this change being cheap is that it is crucial to the movie, and I feel like if they couldn't find a way to justify a 4th arc for Woody without just kidding a big part of his 3rd, then they probably should have just left things a trilogy. Except that the story that comes from this is the reason I'm kinda glad they didn't, as Toy Story 4 features a surprisingly essential feeling return to the franchise's original theme of identity. Like I said before, Bo Peep is now a lost toy, a label that Woody delivered with absolute horror back in the original film.
Oh, I'm a lost toy.
This means that she has no owner, making her the complete opposite of the endlessly dedicated Woody. Where Buzz challenged Woody's identity as Andy's favorite toy, Bo challenges his identity as a toy in general, and even as someone who thinks that Toy Story 3 put a perfect bow on Woody's story, I can't appreciate the new bow that Bow ties here. Woody's eventual decision to leave his toy life behind and live free with Bo also finally shines a light on a pervasive but thus far unspoken idea built into this series, and that is the notion of living for others. The sole purpose of toys is to be there for their kid. This is brought up multiple times, especially in 3, and even when Woody almost walked away in 2, he would have done so to serve in a similar enough function, just elsewhere. So if I was the head of Pixar and got pitched a final Toy Story film in which Woody rethinks this fundamental purpose and finds a new sense of self independent of an owner, I would give it a green light, right after my Coco sequel in which Miguel learns necromancy. But after a little more thinking, I would call it off, and here's why. Oh, not the Coco sequel, that's gold. It all starts with the central conceits of the series once again being meddled with. It has been a fact of this world from the very beginning that toys want nothing more than to be played with. That is simply how they are. Bo rejecting and Woody growing out of this, having them eventually see the arrangement like a person would, is another area in which 4 is too self-aware for my taste, but more importantly, it's a really weird and damaging reframing of the rules. Toy Story 4 turning the toy-child relationship into something elective rather than intrinsic leads to its biggest problem: metaphorical incompatibility. Yes, that is also the name of my new band, SoundCloud in the description. No matter what I think of this story in isolation, and I don't think it's terrible or anything, I can't help but be bothered by how the, at time of recording, resolution to Woody's story takes all that stuff I was saying earlier about accepting the ephemeral nature of life and throws it out the window. Not only does 4 undercut the peace that Woody had made with that pattern by letting him just opt out, it upends the only aspect of a toy's existence that we humans can actually identify with. Woody may be able to walk away from the often painful cycle of his life, but we the viewers cannot walk away from ours. Toy Story 4 makes the franchise too much about itself, which literalizes it in an honestly disheartening way. And yes, I do at least partially blame this approach on those who, either for clicks or laughs, incessantly pick apart worlds like this in the most mind-numbingly literal way possible. That being said, Toy Story 4 isn't meritless, and there are other things one could take from it. For example, I really relate to Woody's decision to leave behind a familiar life in the hopes that doing so will make him happier. I am, literally right now, for that exact reason, about to leave a good steady job in my hometown and move to a different state with nothing concrete lined up. So please support my Patreon. I don't actually have a Patreon. Or SoundCloud. To be clear, that was also a joke earlier. While I'm being more positive, I did say earlier that Toy Story 4 isn't a bad movie, and I'll stand by that. In the end, it does feature Pixar's baseline storytelling competence and some of their trademark charm. It's no Good Dinosaur, so I do understand why people like it. I'm coming across as more of a hater than I actually am because it just so happens that virtually all of my misgivings are exactly the kind of thing I talk about on this show, which isn't to downplay my misgivings, but I just need to acknowledge that there probably isn't a harsher light to view this film in. So Toy Story 4 is adequate, I guess, but that does make it by far the weakest installment of the series, and while I do wish that the franchise ended on the outstanding Toy Story 3, I'm not quite ready to claim that 4 shouldn't even exist. After all, if it wasn't for the mild distraction of its modest entertainment value, I would have had to have endured a slightly longer feeling flight that one time. Perish the thought. And with that, this episode that inexplicably took me 2 grueling months to actually make has finally reached its end. Now, I don't regret doing all 4 films, though I did consider doing just the Andy trilogy for a little while there, but I cannot express how happy I am that we are done and that there are no more Toy Stories to analyze. Oh, absolutely not. The Toy Story franchise has an interesting shape to it. With its heightened identity crisis and self-aware use of the series' core elements, Toy Story 4 functions much better as a bookend to Toy Story 1 than as a follow-up to 2 and 3, and in that same vein, those middle installments raise and then answer their own question in such a satisfying way that they could function as a separate duology. Toy Story's other unique binary is a matter of depth. On one hand, these are kids' movies, they're as accessible as can be, but on the other, there are so many facets to the analogies within them that it could take somebody literal weeks to even get their head around it all, I've been told. In my defense, a lot of that mental wrangling time was spent trying to reconcile numerous contradictions and cognitive dead ends. The reading of Toy Story that I just provided is not comprehensive, as even I have many stray thoughts that didn't make it into the video because I couldn't get them to fit my narrative. This is the downside of building movies on such an abstract concept. You risk it occasionally getting away from you. And while my, frankly, not yet fully formed opinions on subjectivity and thematic cohesion are way too convoluted to get into here, I will say that I don't chalk this case up to poor artistry. I got a lot out of the Toy Story franchise, and I think my points are well supported, but there is a lot going on in these movies, so if you picked up additional or even alternative messages, that is perfectly fine. Unless your takeaway willingly disrespects artist intent and perpetuates the notion that contrarianism is the same thing as media literacy, because that's pretty messed up, when you think about it.